The squeak of her rubber-soled shoes was the metronome of her life. Left, right, left, right. A dull and steady rhythm against the polished linoleum. The mop handle was smooth in her hands, worn from 1,000 other shifts, 1,000 other miles of hallway. Anya Sharma kept her eyes down. That was the first rule. See the floor, not the people. See the scuffs, the dirt, the occasional forgotten drop of blood, but not the faces. The faces were complicated. Here, in the gleaming corridors of Metropolitan General Hospital, she was nobody. A ghost in a gray jumpsuit, pushing a cart of cleaning supplies. It was a perfect, anonymous existence. The cacophony of the emergency department, the sterile intensity of the surgical wing, the hushed reverence of the ICU. It was all just background noise to the rhythmic slosh of water in her bucket. She was good at her job, meticulous. When Anya cleaned a room, it was sterile enough to plate cultures on the floor. A few of the older nurses noticed. They'd leave her a cup of coffee or a wrapped pastry by her cart. They called her Annie, a soft, simple name for a soft, simple woman who cleaned their messes. It suited the cover. Dr. Mark Cross, chief of general surgery, did not notice her meticulous work. He noticed her only as an obstruction, a slow-moving piece of furniture in his fast-paced world. "Excuse me," he said. The words clipped. He didn't wait for an answer, just shouldered past her, his starched white coat brushing against her jumpsuit. He smelled of antiseptic soap and ego. Anya didn't flinch. She simply angled her cart half an inch to the left, giving him a wider berth for his inevitable return trip. She had learned the patterns of this place, the orbits of the celestial bodies, like Dr. Cross, and the gravitational pull they exerted on everyone else. "You missed a spot," a young resident, trailing in Cross's wake like a pilot fish, pointed a condescending finger toward the baseboard. Anya looked, a tiny, almost invisible smear. She nodded, her expression placid. "Thank you, doctor." She watched them sweep into Trauma Bay 1, their voices a low, urgent hum. Anya went back to the smear, dabbing at it with a clean cloth until the linoleum gleamed. She didn't see a smear. She saw a smear of O-negative blood, hastily wiped, but not properly cleaned. She saw the ghost of a crisis. Her mind, a thing she worked tirelessly to keep quiet, cataloged it anyway. O-neg meant a trauma patient with unknown blood type. It meant hemorrhage. It meant they were in a hurry. Her hands might have been mopping, but her brain was still triaging. It was a reflex she couldn't kill. She finished the hallway and moved toward the surgical ward, her cart rattling softly. The night shift was giving way to the day shift. A tired-looking surgeon leaned against a wall, rubbing his eyes. "Lost a GI bleed at 0300, he muttered to a colleague. He was fine, and then he just crumped. Went into DIC before we could even get him to the OR. Anya's hands tightened on the mop handle. Disseminated intravascular coagulation, a cascade of clotting and bleeding, a death sentence if not managed perfectly from the first second. She could almost feel the cold panic of the OR, the desperate call for more FFP, more platelets, more time. She pushed the thought away, pushed it down into the dark, quiet place where she kept all the other ghosts. Her job was the floor. Just the floor. Later, in the staff break room, she refilled her bottle of disinfectant. Dr. Cross was there, holding court with a group of residents. "The problem with modern medicine is the lack of discipline," he was saying, pouring sugar into his coffee. "Too much reliance on scans, and not enough on fundamental skills. In my day, we learned to diagnose with our hands, our eyes." Anya kept her back to him, her movements small and efficient. "It's about control. In my OR, there is one voice. Mine. There is one plan. Mine. Any deviation is a risk to the patient. It's a system of absolute authority because that is what saves lives. He took a sip of his coffee. Amateurs and cowboys get people killed. One of the residents, a young woman with eager eyes, nodded enthusiastically. That's why your mortality rates are the lowest in the state, Dr. Cross. That's right, Cross said, his chest puffing out slightly. Because I don't tolerate mistakes or surprises. Anya secured the cap on her bottle. Surprises. In her old life, every second was a surprise. An RPG hitting the vehicle in front. A secondary IED in the middle of a rescue. A bullet finding its way through a gap in a soldier's body armor. Her entire world had been built on improvising in the face of surprises. His controlled, predictable environment was a luxury she had forgotten existed. She turned to leave, and for a moment, her eyes met his. His gaze slid over her, through her. She was invisible. A gray uniform, a mop, a bucket. Nothing more. It was exactly what she wanted. It was a lie that kept her safe. A lie that kept her sane. But as she pushed her cart back into the hallway, the lie felt thinner than usual. The ghosts were restless tonight. The overhead speaker crackled to life. A woman's voice, calm but firm. Code Crimson, Level 1 Trauma. Trauma Bay 1. Code Crimson. Level 1 Trauma. ETA. 2 minutes. Anya paused. Code Crimson. The hospital's designation for a mass casualty incident or a patient of extreme importance, usually with a security detail. It was rare. It meant something big was coming. The hallway, moments before a lazy river of shift change traffic, became a torrent. Nurses and doctors moved with purpose, their faces set. Carts were rushed toward the ER. The air crackled with a new energy. Anya did what she always did. She moved her cart against the wall, out of the way. She made herself small. She became part of the scenery. But she watched. Dr. Cross strode past, his previous languor gone, replaced by a sharp, predatory focus. "Get me 2 units of O-neg on the warmer, now!" he barked at a nurse. "And I want vascular, thoracic, and general surgery trays on standby. Page Dr. Evans for neuroconsult, now!" The doors to the ambulance bay hissed open, and the world dissolved into controlled chaos. It wasn't a mass casualty. It was one patient. But the entourage was something else. 2 men in dark suits and earpieces entered first, clearing the way. They moved with the stiff, hyper-aware posture of federal agents or private security. Then came the gurney, flanked by paramedics and 2 flight medics in military fatigues. "Gunshot wound to the chest, high-velocity round," a paramedic rattled off as they moved. "Collapsed lung on the right, chest tube placed in the field. BP is 80 over palp, heart rate 140 and thready. We've pushed 2 liters of crystalloid and 1 of colloid. He's GCS 9 and fading." Anya's eyes were locked on the patient. Male. Large frame, military bearing obvious even in his wounded state. An oxygen mask covered his face, but she could see the grim lines etched around his eyes, the salt and pepper stubble on his jaw. A thick field dressing was taped over his right upper chest, already soaked through with dark, arterial red. Cross met the gurney. "All right, let's get him in Trauma 1, on my count. 1, 2, 3. They transferred him to the trauma bed. One of the military medics, a young sergeant, stepped up to Cross. "Sir, a word." "I'm a little busy here," Cross snapped, grabbing a pair of trauma shears. "Sir," the sergeant insisted, his voice low but unyielding. "The patient is Sergeant Major Marcus Thorne, United States Army. This is a matter of national security." Cross paused, shears halfway through Thorne's shirt. He looked from the sergeant to the men in suits standing by the door. He nodded. Understood. Now let me save his life. Anya felt a cold dread wash over her. Sergeant Major. The name meant nothing. The rank did. The men in suits did. This was not a random street shooting. This was something else. Something from her old world bleeding into her new one. She should have walked away. She should have pushed her cart to another floor, another wing. Her shift was almost over. She could just leave. But her feet were rooted to the floor. Her eyes were fixed on the patient's chest. The entry wound was small, precise, but the field dressing was too low. The trajectory, given a high-velocity round, was all wrong. They were focusing on the lung, the obvious injury. They were missing the real danger. From her position in the hall, she could see the monitor over Cross's shoulder. The numbers confirmed her fear. His heart rate was staying high, but his blood pressure was dropping steadily despite the fluids. His pulse pressure was narrowing. Beck's triad. Muffled heart sounds, jugular venous distension, hypotension. She couldn't see the first two from here, but she knew they were there. It wasn't just a hemothorax. It was tamponade, cardiac tamponade. Blood was filling the sac around his heart, squeezing it, preventing it from beating properly. "His pressure's still dropping," a nurse called out. 70/50. "Hang another unit of blood," Cross commanded, "and let's get a chest x-ray in here. I want to see the placement of that tube." Wrong, Anya thought. The word a shout in her silent mind. X-ray is too slow. You don't have time. She could feel the familiar, sickening countdown clock start in her head. A man was dying 20 feet away from her, and the best surgeon in the state was about to kill him with protocol. She took an involuntary step forward, and then another. She was at the doorway of Trauma Bay 1, the smells of blood and fear a punch to the gut. The scene was a blur of blue scrubs and frantic movement, all centered on the man on the table. "Pressure is 60 over pulp. He's bradying down." "Damn it," Cross shouted. "The chest tube must be clotted. Try to flush it." "No," Anya said. The word was quiet, almost a whisper. It was lost in the noise of the room. She took another step, crossing the threshold. She was breaking her own sacred rule. Don't engage. Don't be seen. "Doctor," she said, her voice louder this time, clearer. "That's not it." Dr. Cross turned, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. He saw her, the janitor, standing in his trauma bay, in the middle of his code crimson. "What did you say?" he demanded, his voice dangerously low. "Flushing the chest tube will do nothing," Anya said, her eyes on the monitor. The heart rate was now in the 50s, then the 40s. "He's in tamponade. The bullet must have grazed the pericardium on its way through. You're looking at the wrong injury." A stunned silence fell over the room. The nurses and residents stared, first at Anya, then at Cross. Their expressions a mixture of confusion and horror. Cross's face turned a shade of crimson that clashed with his scrubs. "Are you out of your mind?" he seethed. "Who in the hell do you think you are? I have a man dying on my table, and a janitor is trying to give me medical advice." He pointed a trembling, blood-gloved finger at the door. "Security, get her out of here. Get that janitor out of my OR." A security guard, who had been hovering nervously near the men in suits, started to move toward her. "Not a question. A statement," Anya said, her gaze unwavering, locked with Cross's. "His pulse pressure is narrowing, he's hypotensive, and he's bradycardic despite the blood loss. It's a classic presentation. You need to do a pericardiocentesis or a thoracotomy right now, or he will be dead in the next 90 seconds. "Get her out!" Cross roared. The security guard put a hand on Anya's arm. "Ma'am, you need to come with me." It was in that moment, as the guard began to pull her away, that it happened. The patient on the table, Sergeant Major Marcus Thorne, began to stir. His head thrashed against the backboard, his hand flailing blindly, knocking over a tray of instruments. His eyes, clouded with pain and shock, shot open. They scanned the room, unfocused, terrified. They passed over the nurses, the residents, Dr. Cross. Then they found her. They found Anya. Recognition dawned. The fear in his eyes was replaced by something else. Disbelief. And then, hope. His hand, strong and sure even in his dying moments, shot out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was like iron. The security guard froze. Everyone froze. Thorne's throat worked, a dry, rasping sound escaping the oxygen mask. He pulled it away from his face with his free hand. His voice was a shredded whisper, but in the dead silence of the room, it was a thunderclap. "Nightingale," he rasped, his eyes locked on hers. "It's me. It's Reaper." Anya's blood ran cold. Nightingale, a name she hadn't heard in 5 years, a name she had buried under a mountain of regret and anonymity, a name that belonged to another woman, in another lifetime. The room remained frozen, a tableau of shock. Dr. Cross stared at the patient, then at the janitor, then at the hand gripping her wrist. The pieces weren't just unfitting, they were from different puzzles entirely. Reaper, Anya breathed, the name an old wound on her tongue. Marcus Thorne. Call sign. Reaper. Best sniper in the 75th Ranger Regiment. She'd pulled him out of a burning Humvee in the Korengal Valley. She'd put 3 chest tubes in him while taking enemy fire. He saw the recognition in her eyes. His grip tightened. Desperate. "Don't!" he gasped, his breath hitching. "Don't let them kill me, Doc." Doc. That one word shattered the fragile reality she had built. The janitor, Annie, evaporated. The gray jumpsuit felt like a costume. The monitor let out a long, piercing beep. PEA, pulseless electrical activity. His heart had an electrical signal, but it was being squeezed so tightly it couldn't physically beat. He was, for all intents and purposes, dead. "He's flatlining," a resident yelled, moving for the defibrillator paddles. "No!" The voice that came out of Anya's mouth was not her own. It was a voice forged in the crucible of combat, honed by shouting over the rotor wash of Blackhawks and the crack of incoming fire. It was the voice of command. "Paddles are useless in PEA from Tamponade. You're wasting time," she snapped. She turned to Dr. Cross, her eyes blazing with an intensity that made him physically recoil. The timid janitor was gone. In her place stood a commander. "Your patient has less than a minute. You can either stand there and watch him die, or you can get out of my way." Cross was paralyzed, his mind unable to process the scene. The janitor. Nightingale. Doc. Anya didn't wait for his permission. She turned to the terrified scrub nurse beside the instrument tray. "Scalpel," she said. Her voice was calm now. Pure ice. The nurse stared at her, wide-eyed, unmoving. "Scalpel. Now." Anya held out her hand. It was as steady as granite. The nurse, acting on an instinct older than hospital protocol, slapped the handle of a number 10 blade into her palm. Anya looked at the patient, at Marcus Thorne, her old friend, her brother in arms. She looked at the flat line on the monitor. Then she looked back at Dr. Cross, who was still standing there, a statue of disbelief. "Watch me," she said. And she made the cut. A 5-inch incision, swift and sure, in the 5th intercostal space on the left side of his chest. An anterolateral thoracotomy. A clamshell. The move of a surgeon with nothing left to lose. The room gasped. This wasn't surgery. This was butchery. It was a procedure of last resort. A Hail Mary performed in the field, not in a pristine, top-tier trauma bay. "Rib spreaders," Anya commanded, not looking up. The resident, jolted out of his stupor, fumbled for the instrument and handed it to her. Anya inserted the spreaders and cranked them open. There was a sickening crack of bone and cartilage as the rib cage gave way, exposing the thoracic cavity. The right lung, deflated and dark, was visible. But it was the thing in the center that held her attention. The pericardial sac. It was swollen, bruised a deep purple, and stretched taut like the skin of a drum. It wasn't beating. It was just quivering, strangled by the fluid within. "Just as I thought," Anya muttered. She held out her hand again. Metzenbaum scissors. This time, the nurse didn't hesitate. The scissors were in her hand instantly. With delicate, precise movements, Anya nicked the pericardium. A geyser of dark, clotted blood erupted from the tiny opening, splashing onto her jumpsuit, her face. She ignored it. She extended the incision, and the sac fell open. The heart, suddenly released from its prison, gave a violent, convulsive shudder. "He's got a rhythm!" the anesthesiologist shouted from the head of the bed. "Sinus tach at 130. The flat line on the monitor jumped, resolving into the familiar peaks and valleys of a heartbeat. A fast, frantic heartbeat, but a beat nonetheless. Anya plunged her hand into Thorne's chest, her fingers finding the now beating heart. She gently lifted it, inspecting the surface. There it was. A tiny, oozing tear in the right ventricle, right where a sliver of metal was embedded. Shrapnel. Old shrapnel. "It's a fragment," she said, to the room, to herself. The bullet must have dislodged it from the chest wall. It migrated and perforated the ventricle. She placed her index finger over the hole. The bleeding stopped. "Pressure is coming up. 100/60, the nurse called out, her voice filled with awe. Anya held her finger in place, manually controlling the hemorrhage of a man's heart. She looked up, her gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of the trauma team. Her face was spattered with blood, her eyes burning with an unholy light. She was a terrifying, beautiful sight. "All right," she said, her voice dropping back into that impossibly calm register. "He's stable for now. But I'm just a plug in the dike. I need a suture. 30 proline on a cardiovascular needle." Silence. "Now," she barked, the commander returning. The team scrambled into action, their movements clumsy at first, then smoother as they fell into her orbit, her authority an undeniable force. They were her team now. Dr. Cross stood by the wall, trauma shears hanging limply from his hand. He watched as the janitor, this Nightingale, orchestrated the most incredible save he had ever witnessed. She was performing open-heart surgery in the ER with one hand while calling out orders like a seasoned general. She didn't just save a life. She had resurrected the dead. She sutured the tear in the ventricle with quick, efficient movements, her hands a blur. She placed pledgets to reinforce the fragile tissue. She irrigated the cavity, checked for other bleeders, and then, satisfied, she began to close. "Let's get him to the OR for a proper washout and closure," she said. "But the primary threat is neutralized. Get the cell saver ready. I want all that blood from his chest cavity returned to him. And someone tell the blood bank to switch from the massive transfusion protocol to a 1:1:1 ratio of packed cells, plasma, and platelets. We need to prevent coagulopathy." She was teaching them. In the middle of the chaos, she was giving a masterclass in advanced trauma care. As they prepared to move Thorne, Anya stepped back from the table. She pulled off the bloody gloves, her hands trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was beginning to fade. She looked at her jumpsuit, at the gore that covered the plain gray fabric. The anonymity was gone, washed away in a tide of O-negative blood. She looked up and saw the entire room staring at her. The residents, the nurses, the anesthesiologist, the security guard. Their faces held no mockery now, no condescension, only a profound, shattering awe. Her eyes finally landed on Dr. Cross. He was pale, his own pristine white coat looking ridiculous and clean. He took a hesitant step forward. He started, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat. "I have never, in my 30 years as a surgeon, I have never seen anything like that." Anya just nodded, too tired to speak. "You were right," Cross said, the words costing him everything, and yet offered freely. "I was wrong. I would have killed him. You saved his life. He looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. The janitor's uniform, the blood, the exhaustion. "Who are you?" Anya looked over at Marcus Thorne, her friend, breathing steadily now, his life pulled back from the brink. The ghosts in her mind were quiet for once, silenced by the thunder of a living heart. "My name," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "is Dr. Anya Sharma." Thorne was settled in the surgical ICU. The transfer had been seamless. The formal surgery in the OR, a mere formality of cleaning and closing what Anya had already fixed. She had refused to scrub in, handing the case over to Cross with a quiet, "He's all yours now, doctor." She had then vanished. Cross found her back in the janitor's closet on the surgical floor. The door was propped open. She was sitting on an overturned bucket, methodically cleaning the blood off her plain black shoes with a wet rag. The gore-soaked jumpsuit was gone, replaced by a clean one she must have kept in a locker. She looked small again, diminished. The titan from the trauma bay was gone, replaced by the quiet woman who mopped the floors. Cross leaned against the doorframe. The closet smelled of bleach and floor wax, a scent he'd never consciously registered before. "They're calling it a miracle down in the ER," he said softly. Anya didn't look up. It wasn't a miracle. It was medicine. "No," Cross insisted, stepping into the small, cramped space. "I've seen medicine. I do medicine. That was something else. That was war medicine, wasn't it?" She paused her cleaning, her knuckles white where she gripped the rag. "We called it damage control surgery." "Dr. Anya Sharma," Cross said the name aloud, testing it. "I ran your name through the hospital employee database. It lists you as Anya Sharma, janitorial staff, hired 6 months ago. No credentials listed. No history." "That's correct," she said, resuming her task. "And yet, you performed a resuscitative thoracotomy in my trauma bay and sutured a hole in a man's heart with your bare hands. A man who called you Nightingale." He took a breath. "I'm not a detective, Dr. Sharma, but I'm not an idiot. Not anymore, anyway." The apology was there, unspoken, but hanging in the air between them. It was more than just for his words in the ER. It was for the months of dismissive glances, of treating her like she was invisible. "Why are you mopping floors?" he finally asked, the question raw and direct. "A surgeon with your hands. You could be chief of surgery at any hospital in the world. You could have my job." Anya finally stopped. She placed the rag neatly on a shelf and looked up at him. Her eyes were dark, haunted. The fire was gone, replaced by a deep, ancient weariness. "Because in my last job," she said, her voice hollow, "people died. A lot of them. And it was my fault." "Thorne doesn't seem to think so," Cross countered gently. "He called you Doc. He put his life in your hands." "Thorne is alive," she said simply, as if that explained nothing and everything. "The others aren't." She stood up, her small frame suddenly looking impossibly burdened. "I need to finish my shift." She was shutting him out, rebuilding the walls he had just watched her tear down. "No," Cross said, his voice firm but kind. "You don't. Your shift is over. For good." He held up a hand to stop her protest. "I spoke with the hospital administrator. We've made some adjustments. You're on administrative leave, with pay, from your janitorial duties." He gave a small, wry smile. "We've also provisionally activated your credentials. Pending a review, of course." Anya stared at him. "I don't have any credentials to activate." "Oh, I think you do," Cross said. "We just have to find them. The Department of Defense is not exactly forthcoming. But a man like Sergeant Major Thorne doesn't get treated by just any doc. And the call sign Nightingale, it sounds legendary." Before Anya could respond, a young nurse appeared at the door, her expression urgent. "Dr. Cross? Dr. Sharma? It's Sergeant Major Thorne. He's awake, and he's asking for you." She looked at Anya, her eyes wide with reverence. "He's only asking for you." The ICU room was quiet, filled with the soft, rhythmic beeping of machines that were now singing a song of life, not death. Thorne was propped up slightly, tubes still running from his body, but his eyes were clear. The men in suits were gone, replaced by a uniformed military police officer standing discreetly outside the door. When Anya walked in with Cross, Thorne's gaze immediately found her. A slow smile spread across his face, crinkling the weary lines around his eyes. "Knew you wouldn't let me die, Nightingale," he rasped, his voice still rough. Anya felt a lump form in her throat. She pulled a chair to his bedside. "You always were too stubborn to die, Reaper." He chuckled, a painful, rattling sound. "Had to be. Had to see you again." His expression turned serious. "What are you doing here, Anya? Mopping floors? I heard the nurses talking. It doesn't make any sense." "It's a long story, Marcus," she said quietly. "We've got time," he said. He glanced at Cross, who was standing near the back of the room, a silent, respectful observer. "Is he good people?" "He is," Anya confirmed. Paragraph Thorne nodded. "Good. Because you're going to need good people." He took a rattling breath. "They told me you were gone, left the service, a dishonorable discharge. Said you cracked during Vigilant Serpent. That the inquiry found you responsible for the losses at Objective Rhino." Anya flinched as if struck. Objective Rhino. The name of the field hospital. The name of her personal hell. "The report was accurate," she said, her voice brittle. "I made bad calls. I wasn't fast enough." "No," Thorne said, his voice gaining a sudden fierce strength. "That's a lie. It's the lie they told everyone. It's the lie that let them bury their own catastrophic failure." Cross took a step forward, his interest piqued. "What failure?" Thorne looked at Anya, his eyes pleading with her to believe him. "It wasn't your fault, Doc. None of it. We were sent in on bad intel. The target was supposed to be a low-level weapons cache. Instead, it was a testing ground for a new type of explosive. The brass knew. Or at least, they should have known." Anya shook her head, a reflexive denial. "No. The casualties, the wounds. I'd never seen anything like it. Massive internal blast injuries with minimal external signs. It was impossible." "Exactly," Thorne said, his voice rising with passion. "They called it thermobaric shrapnel, designed to fragment and superheat inside the body. No surgeon on Earth could have saved those men. The fact that you saved any of us is the only miracle that happened that day. You saved me. You saved Kowalski. You saved Diaz. You saved 4 of the 10 who made it to your table. 4. The official report said your panic and procedural errors led to a 100% mortality rate on your table." Anya stared at him, her world tilting on its axis. "What? No, that's not. They told me everyone I touched died." "They lied," Thorne said, his voice grim. "They needed a scapegoat. A massive intelligence failure. A new enemy weapon system they had no defense against. It was a disaster. Colonel Richter couldn't let that stain his record. So he created a new story. A story about a brilliant but unstable combat surgeon who broke under pressure. He buried you to save himself. Colonel John Richter." The name hit Anya like a physical blow. Her commanding officer. The man who had personally debriefed her after the incident. The man who had looked her in the eye and told her she had failed, that her hands were stained with the blood of her comrades. The man who had recommended her for discharge. "Richter," she whispered. "He's a general now," Thorne said with disgust. "Climbed right up the ladder on a pile of bodies and one big lie. Your lie." Cross stepped forward, his face grim. "This is a serious accusation, Sergeant Major. I've got proof, Thorne said. He struggled to move, wincing in pain. In my gear. My go bag. There's a data chip. Taped inside the lining. It has the real comms traffic from that day. The unedited logs. It has Richter ordering the intel blackout after the first casualty reports came in. It has everything. A thought, cold and sharp, pierced through Anya's shock. The men in suits, the national security designation. This wasn't a standard VIP protection detail. They weren't here to protect Thorne. They were here to control him. And what was on that chip? Marcus, she said, her voice urgent. Who shot you? Thorne's eyes darkened. Don't know. Professional job. Long range. Happened on my way to meet a reporter. I was going to blow the whistle on the whole thing. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Richter found out Thorne was going to talk. He sent a professional to silence him, but the hitman failed. Thorne survived. And now he was here, in a civilian hospital. With her. Just then, Anya's temporary hospital pager, a device Cross had given her an hour ago, beeped. It was a text message from an unknown number. It contained only one word. Run. Anya stared at the pager, then looked at the MP outside the door. He seemed relaxed, but his eyes were constantly scanning. Too professional for a simple guard duty. He wasn't hospital police. He was military, and he wasn't taking orders from the hospital. Cross, Anya said, her voice low and tight. Get that data chip, now. What's going on? He asked, seeing the sudden fear in her eyes. We're not safe, she said. Richter knows Marcus is here. He knows I'm here. The database flag, her fingerprints from the emergency credentialing. Of course, she hadn't been thinking. She'd been focused on saving a life, blind to the trap closing around her. Cross didn't question her. He saw the truth in her terror. He immediately left the room, heading for the property lockup where Thorne's belongings were stored. Thorne looked at Anya. He found you. It wasn't a question. He found us, she corrected. Marcus, what does Richter look like now? It's been 5 years. Older, silver hair at the temples, wears expensive suits, looks more like a senator than a soldier, Thorne described. Anya's blood ran cold. She had seen that man, not an hour ago, in the elevator. He had been flanked by 2 other men in suits. He had looked right at her, his eyes cold and assessing. He hadn't recognized her in the janitor's uniform, but he would now. Everyone in the hospital knew her story now. The hospital's overhead speaker crackled. Dr. Adams, please call the administrative office. Dr. Adams, to the administrative office. It was a code, a duress code she had learned in her residency. It meant there was a hostile presence in the hospital, and they couldn't announce it openly. The administration was under threat. Richter was here. Anya stood up, her mind racing, falling back into old patterns. Threat assessment, egress routes, asset protection. The asset was Marcus Thorne. The primary threat was General John Richter. The door to the ICU room opened. It wasn't Cross. It was Richter. He was exactly as Thorne had described, impeccably dressed in a dark gray suit, his silver-templed hair perfectly coiffed. He looked calm, powerful. The 2 men she'd seen earlier flanked him, their jackets bulging slightly. They closed the door behind them, sealing the 3 of them in the room with the helpless patient. The MP in the hallway was gone. Nightingale, Richter said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. It was the same voice that had condemned her 5 years ago. Or should I say, Dr. Sharma, it's been a long time. I see you've given up surgery for sanitation. A pity. You had such promising hands. His eyes were like chips of ice. There was no surprise, no shock, only cold, calculated intent. Richter, Anya said, her voice steady despite the frantic hammering of her own heart. She moved, placing herself subtly between Richter and Thorne's bed. General Richter. He corrected her smoothly. Promotions. They happen when one is effective at one's job. He glanced at Thorne, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. And when one cleans up loose ends, something my associates, it seems, failed to do. What do you want? Anya asked. A transfer, Richter said simply. Sergeant Major Thorne is a person of interest in a matter of national security. He needs to be moved to a secure military facility for his own protection. I have the paperwork right here. He patted his breast pocket. We'll be taking him now. He's not stable for transport, Anya lied, her mind racing. He had a massive cardiac injury. Moving him could kill him. Richter smiled, a thin, predatory slash. That is a risk we are willing to take. His meaning was clear. Thorne would leave this hospital, one way or another. Alive was optional. You're not taking him anywhere, a new voice said from the doorway. Dr. Cross stood there, holding a small black data chip between his thumb and forefinger. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood 2 large hospital security guards, their expressions grim. And behind them, the hospital's CEO, a normally timid man named Peterson, who now looked terrified, but resolute. Richter's calm facade finally cracked. A flash of pure fury crossed his face before he smoothed it over. Dr. Cross, I presume, Richter said. This is a military matter. It does not concern you. Stand aside. It concerns me when a decorated general and his 2 assistants try to forcibly remove my patient from my ICU, Cross retorted, his voice ringing with newfound authority. Especially when that patient has accused said general of covering up a war crime. He held up the chip. And when he has evidence to prove it. Richter's gaze flickered to the chip, then back to Cross. You're playing a very dangerous game, Doctor. I learned from the best, Cross said, glancing at Anya. She taught me that sometimes protocol isn't enough. Sometimes you have to do what's right. Richter's eyes narrowed. He looked at Anya, at the janitor who had become a surgeon, the ghost who had come back to haunt him. He had underestimated her. He had assumed she was broken, a shell. He saw now that he was wrong. She wasn't broken. She had been hibernating. This hospital is now under military jurisdiction, Richter declared, raising his voice. You are all interfering with a federal operation. You will stand down, or you will be arrested for treason. His 2 men moved forward, reaching inside their jackets. No, Anya said, her voice cutting through the tension. Everyone looked at her. She took a step toward Richter, her small frame radiating a power that had nothing to do with size or strength. You don't have jurisdiction here, John, she said, using his first name, stripping him of his rank. You're not a soldier anymore. You're just a corrupt politician in a suit. And this isn't your battlefield. This is my hospital. She turned her head slightly. Mr. Peterson, she said to the CEO, what is the hospital's protocol for an active shooter threat? The CEO, startled, stammered. Low lockdown. Code Silver. We call the police. Then I suggest you do it, Anya said calmly. Because these men are armed, and they are threatening your staff and my patient. Richter laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You think the local police can stop me? Child, I have buried secrets that would topple governments. You are nothing. I'm not nothing, Anya said, her voice a low, fierce whisper. I'm the woman you tried to erase. I'm the surgeon who saved the man you tried to kill. I am the one person in the world who can look at the evidence on that chip and testify, under oath, not just what it means, but what the medical data proves. I can dissect your lie, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but the ugly truth. She took another step, until she was inches from him. You needed a scapegoat, Colonel, she hissed, deliberately using his old rank. And you chose the one person who was too busy saving lives to defend herself. You bet on my silence. You bet on my shame. She smiled. but it was a terrifying expression, all teeth and fire. You lost. The wail of sirens began in the distance, growing closer. Someone had made the call. Richter's face was a mask of cold fury. The game was over. He had lost control. "This isn't over," he snarled at Anya. "It is," she replied. "It's been over for 5 years. This is just the epilogue." Richter gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod to his men. It was a signal Anya knew well, a signal for tactical retreat. But not before a final act of spite. One of the men lunged, not for Cross or the chip, but for Thorne's IV stand, his hand reaching for the central line that fed directly into the patient's heart. An air embolism, instant and almost untraceable. But Anya was faster. She moved with a fluid economy of motion that was breathtaking. She didn't block the man. She sidestepped, grabbed his extended arm, and used his own momentum to pivot him, redirecting his lunge into the wall of medical equipment beside the bed. There was a crash of metal and plastic. In the same motion, she brought the heel of her other hand up in a sharp, brutal jab under the man's chin. His head snapped back, his eyes rolled up, and he crumpled to the floor, unconscious. The second man, shocked, drew his weapon, but he never had a chance to aim it. Dr. Cross, the man who diagnosed with his hands, acted on pure instinct. He swung a heavy stainless steel bedpan he'd grabbed from a nearby rack, like a discus, hitting the man squarely in the side of the head. The gun clattered to the floor as the second goon collapsed. The entire confrontation took less than 3 seconds. Richter stared, utterly dumbfounded. His professional muscle had been taken down by a 5'4" surgeon and a doctor wielding hospital sanitation equipment. The doors to the ICU burst open, and city police officers swarmed in, weapons drawn. "Nobody move! Hands in the air!" Richter slowly raised his hands, a look of pure, unadulterated hatred on his face, directed solely at Anya. Anya didn't even look at him. She was already at Thorne's side, checking his monitors, making sure the jostling hadn't harmed him. "Vitals are stable," she announced to the room. "The patient is fine." She looked up at Cross, who was standing over the man he'd just knocked out, looking at the bedpan in his hand with a dazed expression. Anya almost smiled. "Nice shot, doctor." Cross looked at her, a slow grin spreading across his face. "I guess I still prefer to diagnose with my hands." The aftermath was a whirlwind of police reports, military investigators, and hushed, frantic meetings in the CEO's office. General John Richter was taken into federal custody, his political career vaporized in the space of a single afternoon. The data chip, now in the hands of the Department of Justice, was a ticking time bomb set to dismantle a decade of lies. Anya became a reluctant celebrity within the hospital walls. The story of the janitor surgeon was the stuff of legend. Nurses would stop and stare as she walked by. Residents would ask her questions, not about cleaning, but about coagulopathy and thoracic trauma. She found herself unable to return to the anonymity of the janitor's closet. The ghost had been seen. It could not become invisible again. 2 weeks later, she was summoned to the main boardroom. She wore plain civilian clothes, feeling exposed without her gray jumpsuit or a set of scrubs. Inside, CEO Peterson, Dr. Cross, and the entire board of directors were waiting for her. "Dr. Sharma," Peterson began, his voice filled with a new, unshakable respect. "We, as an institution, owe you an apology, and a debt of gratitude we can never truly repay." Anya shifted uncomfortably. "I just did my job." "No," Cross interjected, his voice firm. "You did a job no one else here was capable of doing. You brought a different kind of medicine into this hospital, a faster, more adaptable, more courageous kind of medicine, and we were too blind to see it." He slid a thick folder across the polished mahogany table toward her. "We have been in contact with the Army Surgeon General's office. Your dishonorable discharge has been expunged. Your record has been corrected, and all commendations restored. Officially, you are one of the most decorated combat surgeons of the last 20 years. Anya stared at the folder, her heart aching with a strange mix of vindication and sorrow for the years she had lost, for the lies she had believed about herself. "That's not why we asked you here," Peterson continued, leaning forward. "Dr. Sharma, this hospital serves a community with one of the largest veteran populations in the country. We see them come in, and frankly, we often fail them. We don't understand their specific needs, their unique injuries, both visible and invisible. We treat them with civilian protocols that don't always apply." He looked around the table, then back at her. "We want to change that. We want to create something new, a place that bridges the gap between military and civilian medicine." Cross took over, his eyes shining with excitement. "We've secured funding for a new wing, the Metropolitan General Center for Advanced Trauma and Veteran Care. It will be a state-of-the-art facility for treatment, research, and training. A place where we can teach the next generation of surgeons the lessons learned on the battlefield." He pushed the folder gently toward her. "It needs a director, a leader, someone who understands both worlds, someone with the courage to tear up the rulebook when a life is on the line." Anya looked from Cross to Peterson, to the hopeful faces of the board members. They weren't just offering her a job, they were offering her a purpose, a way to integrate the two halves of her life, the surgeon and the soldier, the ghost and the woman, a way to make sure the sacrifices of Operation Vigilant Serpent were not in vain. She thought of the men she had lost. She could not bring them back, but she could honor them. She could build something in their memory. "I am no longer hiding." The thought came to me, clear and strong, a voice that was entirely my own. I spent 5 years trying to erase the person I was, punishing myself for a failure that was never mine. I thought anonymity was peace, but it was just a slow death. The truth is, I was never more alive than when I had blood on my hands and a life to save. That is not something to run from. It is something to run toward. She looked at Dr. Cross, her first antagonist, now her staunchest ally. She looked at the boardroom full of people who had once seen a janitor and now saw a leader. She pushed the folder back across the table. "I don't need to see the offer," she said, her voice clear and steady, the voice of command returning, but softer now, tempered by grace. "I accept." 6 months later, the center was a reality. The air in the new wing hummed with a quiet, focused energy. It was a fusion of the best of both worlds, the pristine technology of a top civilian hospital and the rugged, functional design of a forward surgical unit. Dr. Anya Sharma, director of trauma, stood in the center of a high-tech simulation lab. She wore a crisp white coat over her scrubs, a name tag proudly displaying her title. She was overseeing a team of young, eager residents as they worked on a hyper-realistic training mannequin, its internal mechanisms simulating a complex blast injury. "No, no," Anya said, her voice sharp but patient. "Don't just pack the wound. You're not seeing the underlying problem. Look at the blast pattern. The pressure wave has likely caused a mesenteric tear. You're treating the hemorrhage, but you're ignoring the source. You have to think 3 steps ahead." She stepped in, guiding a young surgeon's hands, her touch both gentle and firm. In the field, you don't have the luxury of a CT scanner. You have your eyes, your hands, and your understanding of mechanism of injury. That's your most powerful tool. The residents watched her, their expressions a familiar mix of awe and reverence. She was already a legend. From the glass-walled observation deck above, 2 men watched the scene. One was Dr. Mark Cross, his arms crossed, a proud, fatherly smile on his face. The other was Marcus Thorne. He was out of his uniform now, dressed in civilian clothes, leaning on a cane but standing tall. He had taken a consultant position with the new center, his experience invaluable. "She's a natural," Thorne said, his voice full of admiration. "She's more than that," Cross replied. "She's a force of nature. She's changing the way we think about everything." Down in the lab, Anya finished her instruction and stepped back, letting the team work. She happened to glance up at the observation deck and saw them. She saw Marcus, whole and healthy. She saw Cross, his respect a tangible thing. She smiled, a real smile. It reached her eyes, erasing the last of the shadows. The ghosts were finally at peace. She was no longer Nightingale, the haunted surgeon. She was no longer Annie, the invisible janitor. She was Dr. Anya Sharma. And she was home. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, no longer running from her past, but using it to build a better future. One life, one lesson, one surgeon at a time.